Well, good morning. We meet again. And it's just a day after a fairly big post for me yesterday, which was talking about sex energy, that great taboo subject in our world of, North American society at least. Um, and for some reason, drawing attention to energy and to sex energy and to, sex is a part of energy, but energy not necessarily being all that is sexual. Uh, for some reason, it made me really ponder being a warrior for the rest of the day yesterday after I'd made that post. And I think it's an important thing to talk about next because it is the attributes of warriorhood which really help you find peace in what you're experiencing if you begin to connect with energy, if you really begin to feel that love inside your heart, if you really are aware that you're going to die. What then? Remember, I've said that. What then? And for decades of my life, I was actually following the attributes of warriorhood and yet still being radically disconnected from my inner being due to, my trauma history and all the things that I've been discussing in terms of my healing journey here with you, which I'm now calling definitive journey in terms of what the name of these posts are, but will still often be about the healing journey because I'm still describing that, still going through it. And I've talked about these posts as acts of discipline on my part. And I'm going to break into that right now because I'm going to talk about being a warrior and warriorhood and how I feel that these posts are a kind of discipline for me, a kind of disciplined behavior, which is changing me by drawing me into a new way of being. And it's not new, like, oh, I have never known this before, but by coming before you in this way, and by you, I mean the unknown people of the internet that I've said many times, I am drawing myself into the presence of the unknown and the unknowable, and I'm acknowledging that my intuition, my heart, my connection with intent tells me that this is what I've got to be doing right now, whatever the outcome. It feels like the right move, and therefore I'm taking these moves despite the fact that I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about, or I don't know how it's going to go. As I said, I don't really plan in detail what I'm going to say here. I'm trying to engage you in the spirit of authentic creation and to create this moment as it happens. And what I find as time goes on is that moments do accrue into a meaning, and I discover something myself as a result of this. So ultimately, it is something I'm doing for myself, and this is my healing journey, my self-care. It's also something I think is important to communicate because by vibrating in this way, by being on this energy frequency, I believe that in some way, people out there who might benefit from exposure to proper energy frequency will benefit, and if people don't, well then so be it. You know what I mean? In the end of the day, I benefited, and so I'm trying to share the benefit. Whether or not that happens is not for me to say. It is my discipline to do it anyway. So being a warrior now, I've talked about some of the feelings that I have about being a fighter and being a warrior. Like I'm a fierce man. I'm a fierce man of I hate to say it, of the old paradigm, us versus them. It's something I really struggled with when I was younger, is that being warlike. You know what I mean? Like, how do you be warlike? There's no avenue for being warlike unless you join the army, right? And I think it's no coincidence that there's a real disconnect between the armed forces of our society and our society at large. There's very little respect or true affiliation with our armed forces. We always talk about it on the special days, but no one aspires for that. Do you know that 100 years ago, it was pretty much the best men of society who went into the army? It was the best place to realize yourself. And that's completely changed. And you go back further and further in history, And the warriors were always the best men of society. I say men, yes, I'm using old paradigm language. Men and women can, of course, be warriors, and women are fighters just as fierce and just as aggressive as men are these days. I mean, look at the evolution of boxing and mixed martial arts. Women are involved and are fierce warriors in themselves. And if I think about where I learned warriorship from, I didn't learn to be warlike from Carlos Castaneda. I didn't learn to be fierce from him, but I learned how to properly mobilize it from him. And again, if I look back in my younger years, I just wish I had joined a fighting club, or even perhaps the armed forces when I was younger, as a gesture, but I didn't do it. And, for reasons of my own stuckness and blockage and emotional problems, that this healing journey is the substance of me working out. So anyway, being a warrior, I say discipline. Discipline is the key piece, being disciplined. But what does being disciplined mean? It means doing your best in every moment. Remember, that was the thing I mentioned. The first words that I heard Spirit talk to me, Spirit is in contact with each of us all the time. We just don't pay attention because we're too caught up in our minds. We're too caught up in our conditioning, whatever that might be. We're too caught up in all of our day-to-day worries and concerns. We're caught up in this tiny, insignificant world of the first attention. Again, that's another Carlos Castaneda concept. I've talked about it before. But, the world of the everyday life, And the concerns there are so limiting and so engaging. All of our capacity gets sucked into those channels, and we don't ever know how to even feel good in our lives, or tap our own love, or do anything meaningful with ourselves, because we're just so wrapped up and caught up in the runaround, And I find this gets echoed in, say, when Sadhguru talks about the world of illusion, samsara, and Maya. It's like the world is there. It's not an illusion, but when it sucks you in and you lose track of who you are inside, it does become an illusion. It is illusory because it is mutable. Because it's mutable, it's subject to our effect. How do we get to the place where we can affect our reality? This is the essence of what being alive is about. And so when I say being a warrior, this is just my own feelings on it, because as I've told you before, I get a little bit cagey about systems, about religious systems. My spiritual seeking leads me to a place where I feel a resonance with people who say practice yoga, but I'm wary because their system becomes an absorbing process, which for me would deviate me from my own experience of freedom. And I realize that they would say that's not true, and it's really the way and the proper way. But there's a certainty amongst practitioners of religious systems that I'm not interested in. And that is an attribute of warriorhood, which is accepting uncertainty, accepting uncertainty, accepting that this material world, this world of light and life, this world of evolution is just a surface, just a single surface of possible realities. And that's not to demean it, because my healing journey has involved pain in my body, pain in my heart, broken thinking processes, broken relationships, all sorts of troubles in this world of material life. And yet healing through those is to release me from the bonds and the bonds that have held me trapped in a certain circularity, a certain repetitious going nowhereness of the world when you're not awake and not aware of what you're doing. And so doing your best in every moment is that first piece. And as I said to you, I first heard those words from Spirit in 1991. 33 years later, I'm still working on it. And it's only, the stupidity of my stuckness which held me trapped. And it's other parts of the warrior's way, which I'm going to talk about now, which are how to how to break apart all that stuckness, that accretion. And one of the most important ones was called erasing personal history. Now, that sounds pretty cagey, like, oh, you erase personal history, no one knows who you are, right? Carlos would always talk to Don Juan and be like, well, that doesn't sound right. You know who you are, don't you? And Don Juan would say, I don't actually. I've erased personal history. And when I was younger, because I was stuck, of course, it made no sense to do that because, of course, I couldn't let go of my own personal history because of how awful I thought I was. I couldn't let go of that because that was the one thing that was holding me in a world that made sense to me. What made sense was unhealthy and toxic and limiting, and yet it was the conditioning that held me into a certain fixed and rigid way of living. That is personal history. It is the conditioning, and you have to erase it. Erasure doesn't mean lying about it or hiding it or anything like that. It means disconnecting yourself from it. It means soothing those places where we're abrased and hurt and unable to acknowledge it. If you're unable to acknowledge it, it's got a hold on you. So by erasing personal history is to soothe those hurt spots, bring them to awareness, allow your loving presence to dissolve them in a healing energy. And when you start doing that, you become different from your conditioning. You become freed from your conditioning little by little. And as you do that, I have found that I discovered another lesson of Carlos Castaneda is that the quality that makes the personal history so sticky. Sticky is another word I've used to talk about how that feels when you're like, you can't let go of the conditioning. It's sticky, it sticks you into it. And then you start repeating things unhealthily. But the real thing that keeps you stuck, self-importance, the very worst, most dangerous. If there's a demon and a devil which holds us all in ignorance and stupidity, it is self-importance. The feeling that you're so important that you have to hold on to these things. They're so important, right? So like my history was so important, like, oh my God, I'm such a terrible person. I can't let any of these things happen. It seems like I'm doing a service to the world, right? What am I doing? I am simply attributing so much importance to the negativeness that I think about myself that I can't live or act unless I'm very careful with that, right? That huge self-importance. So when I was younger, I never spoke honestly about myself. I could never have had this conversation with the strangers of the internet when I was younger. And I would have said, well, if I say something, I'm just being arrogant. It's just arrogance to say these things. You know what I mean? And yet that was yet another way that I would lie to myself. I had kept myself in a prison inside myself through arrogance, through self-importance. And that self-importance glued me to my personal history, and I was unable to do anything but just continue to live empty, self-destroying cycles again and again and again. But speaking from a liberated perspective, I can say that the thing that you've got to do is erase that personal history. And by erase it is erase the connection points. Doesn't mean you're going to lose who you are. It means you're going to lose who you think you are. And that is vital if you want to live a full life. How else do you unlock love inside yourself? It's by breaking the cycle of whatever hurts have damaged you, and the thinking, the coping, all the things that were once valuable, but which hold you in this unhealthy place, right? I mean, it is history. It is personal history. And what holds you there is self-importance. And let me take a second to talk about people, in the helping field that I work in. When you're dealing with someone with mental health and addiction issues, and you get to know them, and you find out really what their core ideas are, because it's rarely feelings, unless they're negative feelings like fear, paranoia, anxiety, worry. I mean, those are the kind of substantial feelings that people who are in a real crisis place of mental health and addiction, those are usually just their feelings, purely negative, depressive elements, negative connections to the world, right? But then as you get to know someone, you got to learn about, the ideas about the world that they have. And it is the ideas they have about the world, which is what CBT would call the schemas, those little idea pieces, the ideations that we have about what the world is, who we are, why life is the way it is, why our experience is the way it is. These are the ways that we've understood the world, right? These schemas, and they give rise to automatic thinking that we're not aware of, right? Inevitably, you will find, and even though clients are as different as there are people, everyone has a different story, everyone has different ideas, even if they fall into themes which could be called, diagnoses. When you talk about the statistical and diagnostic manual, the DSM, right? I said that the wrong way. They're just categorizations to help understand thematically what someone is going through, and I find that the kind of language that I've learned through, my spiritual seeking, being a warrior, you never talk about clients this way in the field. And yet these terms do apply, because someone who's got a severe and persistent mental illness, like they become totally dislocated from their feelings and from their bodies, Many aspects of mental illness are someone who doesn't live in the world, that schizophrenia, breakage from the world, that essential breakage from self, from being, from the world around us, from others, from the body. It is sad and tragic to experience. But when you get into it and you get to know someone who is like that, inevitably you find these terrible ideas. And if you ask someone, about their ideas, like for example, I knew a woman who had terrible voices. The voices kept her in a perpetual state of paranoia or excited interaction with voices. It was just this wheel, you know what I mean? And when the voices weren't there, paranoia of such an extremity that she almost couldn't move. She just physically paralyzed herself because she was so terrified. The voices then were kind of company, in a weird way, and so when she was involved in the voices, that was another unhealthy pattern because they led her into all sorts of terrible patterns of drug use and behaviors that would end her in a hospital, you know what I mean? But the thing is that down deep, I would get into dialogues like, well, how do you know these voices are who you say they are? Because they were all characterized for her, you know what I mean? She'd say, I just know that. I just know it. I'm saying, well, how do you know that? I just do, was the answer, you know what I mean? And it's like, you just know it, and yet clearly you're not living a full life, but there's that disconnect. I just know it. I know something that you don't know. Okay. And at that point, you can't go any further because it's useless to argue with someone if they've got delusional ideas, they're trapped in potentially psychosis, At best, maybe there's a partial insight when medicines are helpful, but deep down, self-importance there, I know things that you don't know. What do you know? Well, eventually they're just ideas. It's just ideation. It's not a feeling because they're ideas which are coping with a feeling of paranoia and negativeness. And that's invariably going to come from traumas. But with the severe and persistent mental illness, you can only rarely get into a conversation of traumas and pain because you're just caught up in this whirlwind of problematic ideas and thinking in which the person is trapped, So if I think about my own experience, like there but for the grace of God go I, like I had terrible emotional problems and traumas that blocked me and myself, and my thinking imprisoned me, and my ideas about myself and about life were unhealthy and toxic. But over time, when information comes, I was able to access it because for nothing other than sheer luck, I didn't have the same kind of enclosing damaged, broken ideation. I was able to change my ideation. And I say I, well, and as I've said before, I was, again, given the sheer fortune of all I can think of as saying a spiritual intervention. I was moved by events beyond my control, and that was what released me. Events beyond my control. As long as I felt I was in control of things, I was stuck and trapped. And it's only when that jarring jolt of things outside my control, which helped me to access my attributes of warriorhood, open up my love, realize that I was going to die, and that my own traumas were around the death crisis I experienced when I was 14. This is quite a bit of a ramblesome topic, right? But I'm circling around warriorhood, because very few people are warriors, and I don't think there's any limitation to who can be a warrior, but few people are called to have discipline in their lives. And that's another aspect that I notice about a lot of clients is that there's no discipline there, And so there's another term Castaneda uses, self-indulgence. Self-indulgence is like when you're just, if I'm going to say it in terms of my healing journey, self-indulgence is when your conditioning overcomes you and you just let it happen. Oh, I'm so bad and I think these ways. Like whatever you may be going through, for that conditioning mechanism to stay in place, you got to let it happen. You got to continually choose to renew it, and that's the challenging piece. How to choose differently, how to do that, and discipline is the way. Discipline. I mentioned the term unbending intent a few times ago. Unbending intent is when you can visualize something and your vision is more powerful than what's in the way, no matter what comes at you. The first time I experienced that was before I had any training as a warrior at all. Coming out of high school, I was this bloated, fat, miserable person. And that was the result of traumas, the result of all the negativeness that I experienced in my childhood that manifested and became a real problem when my mom died and I never got any help. That sounds very blameful, but it's all the choices that I made that sealed me in there. And the worst was pretending that everything was okay, right? Because, that was my poor old broken dad's way of dealing with things. And so there was this cap on my true feelings I could never have access to, and yet I could still act and still live within a certain range. And so I learned about unbending intent by losing weight. It was wrong, and I remember one day I just decided, like, no more am I going to feel this way, which is to say, like being self-indulgent, just indulging, engorging myself in fast food, say, or whatever. It created a sickening feeling inside myself. I always felt bad because I was overweight and my clothes were tight and like, I like being social, but being fat meant I didn't want to be seen because I felt disgusting. So it was like all these terrible feelings finally manifested in this sense of revulsion, real revulsion, and in myself, for myself. And that actually is what unlocked unbending intent, because I just stopped one day. Literally, I just stopped one day. 1988, 1989 there, I just gorged myself on a submarine sandwich at lunchtime. And I was just, delicious, of course. But then afterwards, I just felt fat and greasy and disgusting. And I was walking the streets of Victoria on my way back to work. And I just remember walking over these cement bricks. I remember looking at the pattern of cement bricks, and they're the cement bricks that are on Yates Street, Yates and Broad. That's where it happened. Of course, Yates and Broad is completely transformed now in Victoria from what it was in 1988. A&B Sound was there. There was an Arby's there, I think. It was very different. But these brick paving stones were there, and I just remember being mesmerized by the pattern of these brick pavings. And I just said, I'm changing today, just like that. And it's like, this is what happens, when change comes. The pressure builds up inside you, right? Pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation to action. Like, I think I've been in preparation for a long time. I've got to lose weight. I'm disgusting. Ugh, gross. What am I going to do? Finally, one day, I can't explain how or why. One day, that was it. I hit action phase. And from then on, it was unbending intent. Controlled my diet. Controlled my eating. Learned to be patient in the feeling of hunger, and quite extreme hunger. You know what I mean? And that's unbending intent. That's when you change yourself by changing your patterns. And I learned about unbending intent there, and I learned about the power of determination and discipline. I became disciplined at that point. And I'd always exhibited discipline in certain parts of my life when I was younger, but never in anything important. This was the first important life-changing thing I did for myself. And as I said, I lost 100 pounds in about 10 months. And it was after I did that that my friend gave me Carlos Castaneda's Journey to Ixtlan, and I began learning about these things that I'm talking to you right now. Because, like, for me, I'd already moved into the zone of my energy was ready for some kind of change, and change did come. As I learned about the attributes of warriorhood, even though it took me so many, many years to erase my personal history, to lose self-importance, and to take responsibility, which is to say, try hard in every moment. If you're not trying hard in every moment, that's because you've decided that what's in front of you isn't important for some reason. You decide that your own importance, your own, I don't want to be bothered by whatever's happening, or this person's not important to me, or this process doesn't mean anything to me. These are all decisions you make, which blind you to what could happen in the living moment. And it's the living moment where we feel our love. It's the living moment where we can make change. It's the living moment where we feel spirit, where we breathe in and we can access the intelligence of the universe. I mean, this is what happens in the moment, and only in the moment. It's not tomorrow. It's not yesterday. Getting into the dance of, like, thinking about tomorrow or remembering yesterday, all it does is dissolve your presence in the moment into some kind of partially existent mental landscape. And that's no place to be. I've spent decades being there, not still, but stagnantly trapped in routines and patterns, And that's another attribute of warriorhood, actually, disrupting the routines of life. And I mean, the funny thing is, if you go to yoga and the Eastern mysticism of the Vedas is all about routines. Everything is a routine. Ritual is a routine, right? And there's something which, again, Carlos Castaneda has moved me more in my life. So I feel that disrupting routines is as important, or maybe more important, than establishing routines, even though I'm a creature of habit and routine. And I know that, and struggling against that is definitely an interesting process, So, I mean, disrupting routines is to simply break the patterns and open up your access to the living moment, and allow yourself to be in flow state. Allow that loving, healing, evolving, dreaming flow of energy to be in your life, to allow yourself to flow and be present. And all these attributes I'm talking about right now, they are the things that we can always be working on. When I talk about being healing, I'm talking about erasing personal history. When I'm talking about erasing personal history, I'm talking about being aware of the traumas which break our emotions and break our spirits and dislocate us from ourselves. And also the thinking that goes on that we don't even think about, the thinking and the ideas that happen as a result of our feelings and our experiences, our history, which then contrive to be conditioning, which unfortunately derails our lives and forces us to manifest only what our conditioning would dictate to us. And in that process, we are reduced to being prisoners of our minds, which is not a good place to be, but which is a place where most people are in life. So for me, healing journey, erasing personal history, coming to grips with the history and being able to live outside of that conditioning. And the key piece of that, another lesson, losing self-importance. For me to be here in front of you right now, I call it discipline. This is my humbleness. It's my humbleness to say these things to you right now, because it was self-importance, pride, fear of judgment, fear of what people are going to say about my insane words was the thing that imprisoned me inside. And so to say these things to you is to release my knowledge, is to release my love, is to release everything that I've known and everything that has kept me imprisoned inside, and to let it go in front of you. Letting it go in front of you is somehow discipline and humility to me, because I don't know what's going to be important for you, and I can't be worried about what's important for you. I have to be worried about what's important to me. And what's important to me is, ironically, the lack of my own importance. That's weird, because in the end, my loving being, I am the loving being that is going to die in my life. And knowing that is humbleness incarnate. Whatever I think, whatever I do, nothing's going to matter on the day I die except what I felt when I was going through it. And so the being loving, the being healing if needed, the being an evolutionary person, which is something I think I'm doing right now. I think I'm engaging my evolving process here by sharing this with you, because I'm sharing my healing journey in the hopes that perhaps I'm going to create a small piece of movement, of vibration that might have a positive effect out there in this turgid sea of stagnation and misery that our society is currently. And then ultimately being dreaming, which is what life is. That's my goal, being dreaming. Loving and dreaming is to me the same state. When you're in love, you're in a dream. If you don't like that dream, or if you can't dream, let's heal. Let's engage in evolutionary process. You know what I mean? And for me, more so than other systems or other modes of learning, being a warrior is the thing that has galvanized me. Being a warrior, being humble, being disciplined, having no self-importance, and not being dominated by personal history. And as a result of all these things, taking responsibility of the moment, knowing that my choices and my decisions are all that I have in life. I can't control what goes on outside. I can't control other people. I can hardly even control things in my own life, but I can control me. And when I am in a state of control, which isn't effort, I find the kind of control that I'm talking about is effortless. Being disciplined is effortless. Being here with you is effortless. Where effort comes in is if I start listening to the conditioning, or I feel the pull, the sticky pull of self-importance, like, oh, I can't say these things. People are going to think I'm an idiot or crazy or stupid, or whatever nonsense the mind starts concocting out of that self-importance and that conditioning of personal history, that darkness. And I don't want to say darkness because, eternity is darkness. Eternity is everything that we cannot see. But how we feel about death, how we feel about everything we don't know, gets tainted by our personal history, by our self-importance, by our lack of taking responsibility for ourselves, by a lack of discipline in our living moment. And I mean, it does lend itself to like, well, being a warrior means being at war. And when I was younger, I had a hard time accepting that life was war, because I was like, no, life should be about peace, right? Which is ironic for someone who's never at peace. That was just one of those self-pitying thinking processes that I was stuck in, because I could never deal with my self-importance, which is wrapped up in my personal history, which is wrapped up in all those ideas, those schemas that were imprisoning me inside a draining and unfulfilling lifestyle. And that's been behind me for several years now. And My message to you today is be a warrior. Life is war. That doesn't mean violence. It's got nothing to do with violence. Nothing I've said today, or in fact at any point in anything I've said in any of these posts, has got to do with violence. It's the opposite of violence. Violence is what happens when all of those harsh, conditioned responses are in play, and your thinking imprisons you, and you're obeying all of those commands, and they're ignorant. They are ignorant by definition. Ignorant, closed, and definitely will lead to conflict. And conflict is violence, you know. And I'm not to say that life doesn't have a lot of violence in it, you know. Life and death is violence, you know. We eat food, we consume other life to live. I mean, that's violence in itself. It's how we approach it, you know. It's how we approach it. And if you approached in a disciplined state of mind, discipline is humility. Discipline is humility, because by being disciplined, I'm recognizing that anything I think or feel is less important than what this moment might be. What might this moment be? If I don't imprison myself by telling you I know what this moment is going to be, I set you free and I set me free. That's being disciplined and being humble. It's very important, I feel. More important than any kind of self-importance, because it is what releases me into the moment and allows me to access intent. You know, my own unbending intent bridges myself to intent. By that, reaching up so that spirit can come down and meet us in the middle. So be a warrior, be disciplined, lose that self-importance, lose that personal history, take responsibility for yourself and be here, and discover what that can do for you. That's my message today. I hope you stay well, keep reaching, and be disciplined. See you.